Hi, Global Fact, and welcome to this second session of the first ever academic track at Global Fact. My name is Steensen. I'm a professor of journalism and head of the Department of Journalism and Media Studies at OsloMet University. I'm also the project leader of a recently launched research project called Source Criticism and Mediated Disinformation. This is a 4-year project with a research team consisting of Oskar Westlund, Bente Karlsnes, Valerie Blair-Gagnon, and Lucas Graves. And the main objective of this research project is to develop principles for and practices of digital source criticism and media and information literacy in relation to emerging technologies, with special emphasis on detection and countering of disinformation. And the reason why I mention this is that because one of the tasks of this SCAM research project is to cooperate with the International Fact-Checking Network on establishing this academic track at Global Fact, where current research on fact-checking and problems of mis and disinformation can be discussed. And as you all know, we were supposed to host the Global Fact 7 in Oslo at OsloMet University this year, but I'm happy to say that we will do so next year instead. We posted a call for papers to be presented at this academic track earlier this year, a call which attracted a lot of submissions that went through a review process. And we were then able to invite some of the researchers to present their work here today. So in this session, we will have six scholars presenting and discussing their current research. They have all uploaded presentations of their work to YouTube, so you may find them there. We will only do very brief presentations of the research here and mainly emphasize on discussing the work. We have divided the session into 2 parts. In the first part, 3 scholars will discuss their research which from different perspectives and from different parts of the world address problems of public trust related to journalism and misinformation. And in the second part, 3 other scholars will discuss the research on fake news and fact-checking, also from different perspectives and different parts of the world. And I must add that this is a very time zone challenged panel. We have panelists from South Korea, from Europe, from Africa, and from North America. So in South Korea, I know it's approaching midnight, while it's early, not early, but it's still morning in North America. And we will also do questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, please post them, and we will do them first after 25 minutes approximately, and then again 5 minutes before the end of the panel. So let me now introduce the 3 scholars that will join this first part of the session. First, we have Edwin Tallam, who is a Ph.D. candidate at Wits University in South Africa. And Edwin Tallam is doing research on the elements that influence young people's trust in online news in Kenya. Edwin Tallam, welcome. Good to see you. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and the research that you're currently doing.
Hello, Global Fact, and thank you very much, Steen, for your introduction. My name is Edwin Tallam, a Ph.D. candidate at the University of the Witwatersrand, South Africa. Though I did my study in Kenya, and my study basically looks at online news consumption. And for this project, the one I presented during this conference, it's just part, or it's a chapter in my PhD thesis, and I look at the elements that influence young people, particularly when it comes to trusting online news. Now, the point, or my entry point in this debate or conversation is, while Kenya has been framed as a digital hub of innovation, it is particularly true that many young people are exalted as the drivers of innovation, and their ingenuity has actually been acknowledged globally. Yet we still don't know how they come to trust or how they access news in their daily lives. And therefore, this study I conducted between September 2017 and May 2018 aimed at trying to understand what is really happening when it comes to news consumption. And one of the aspects that I was particularly interested in is some of the elements that persuade or influence young people, particularly when they are consuming online news.
Thank you, Tallam. And the next panelist we have in this session is Ritvvij Parrikh, who is a Knight Fellow at the International Center for Journalists and a PhD candidate at the South Asian University. And Parrikh is doing research on the cognitive factors that make misinformation persuasive. Welcome, Parrikh. Do we have you in the picture? Hi, there you are. Welcome. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and your research as well.
Hi, Steen. Just a correction. My co-author is a PhD candidate at the South Asian University.
Okay, sorry.
Thanks for having me on the panel. I'm a Knight Fellow in India with the International Center for Journalists. I'm also the co-founder of Proto, a media development startup in India. Last year, during the Indian general elections, along with Midan and Fathom, we launched Checkpoint, a verification tip line on WhatsApp. In less than 2 months, we received over 80,000 pieces of misinformation, but we were able to verify only 500. The volume of misinformation out there is an order of magnitude more than what fact checkers can address. In fact, solutions at the information level, that is debunking and fact checking, are not scalable. Hence, along with my co-authors Nidhi Nair and Shubham Dwivedi, we decided to explore solutions that work at a more fundamental level than information. We started applying cognitive psychology to investigate what makes a piece of misinformation persuasive in WhatsApp. We built on the works of Schertz, McGuire's stages of cognition, and Lewandowski's set of features to identify 5 factors that determine susceptibility of visual misinformation on WhatsApp. The 5 factors are relevance, ease of comprehension, influence or trust, bias, and story coherence. The framework was further detailed out into 16 questions and 64 answer choices. We then tested this framework on the data from Checkpoint. With these factors identified, the hope is that a future study will determine a solution that could introduce just enough friction, a nudge, or a prompt in otherwise online binging of content to kickstart healthy skepticism, thereby reducing susceptibility to misinformation.
Thank you, Ritvvij. And the third panelist we will introduce now is Dimitrakopoulou, who is a visiting professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And Dimitra is doing research on patterns of information consumption, trust, and decision-making ahead of a much-awaited COVID-19 vaccine. Welcome to Dimitra. Hi, there you are. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and your research as well.
Good morning from Boston. Hi, Steen. Hi, Global Fact. So I'm a visiting assistant professor and a Marie Curie Global Fellow at the MIT Media Lab and the University of Zurich. And in my work, I focus on the interplay between information and vaccination to explore what drives people's behavior around information seeking and consumption, specifically in the context of the ongoing pandemic. So to achieve that, I'm hosting focus groups with more than 150 participants across the US and tune into people's lived experiences as a means of understanding and lifting up patterns of information consumption, trust, and decision-making ahead of the COVID-19 vaccine. And the goal of this research is to gain insights into the kind of information and data that are most valued and needed to support an informed decision on future vaccination. And the way these insights can be helpful is to try to close the information and communication loop between the audience and different stakeholders associated with the pandemic, such as journalists, public health institutions, and the scientific community, by understanding what kind of information is most valued, what kind of information is most needed, what kind of stories, what kind of angles or perspectives are important, so that they can become relevant and relatable, answering specific questions and concerns that people have, and then translate them into actionable information by the involved stakeholders. And I'm happy to tell more during our discussion.
Thank you, Dimitra, and welcome to all of you. And we will now bring everyone up in the view. And I guess you have all watched each other's presentations, and I guess that you have several things that you would like to discuss with each other. I suggest we start with discussing your research, Edwin. And to kick things off, I would just like to address something that you actually say in your presentation, because all of you are dealing with issues of trust somehow. And you say in your presentation that measuring trust is next to impossible. And that's a statement I tend to agree with. And I hope that we can discuss parts of that later on. But one of your very interesting findings in Kenya from your study in Kenya is that WhatsApp seems to be the most trusted platform for news consumption. So I would just like to ask you to elaborate a bit on that. Why do you think WhatsApp is the most trusted and more trusted than other social media, including blogs, because that seems to counter findings from other countries?
Many thanks, Steen. I think I have to appreciate the role that you played, particularly when we met at in Amsterdam, and you asked a very important question then in January 2019, that how do we separate or how do we distinguish between technical and emotional engagement? And in that regard, and in relation to my study, I established that when it comes to the architecture of social media, it is actually built on the element of building relationships. And because of that, I sought first of all to try using the concept and thinking with the concept of scalable sociality proposed by Daniel Miller and his colleagues. I sought first of all to try and draw a line between social media and messaging applications. And because of that, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn fell under the group of public platforms, while another section or category that I was calling private messaging applications was made up of WhatsApp, Telegram, Snapchat. And what I basically established from my study, as you have rightly mentioned, is because of the nodes of relationship that these are enacted by the socio-technical affordances of the public platforms such as Facebook and the private platforms such as, for example, WhatsApp, that indeed when it comes to WhatsApp, it means that young people in this context have the contacts and could have a relationship, a close working relationship with the contacts. And because of that, when it comes to sharing information, they tend to trust information shared by maybe very close friends within WhatsApp groups and even directly through the WhatsApp messaging application, as compared to, for example, information received from other public platforms. Now, this was a bit interesting because, as you have rightly mentioned as well, it's 10 years ago or barely a decade ago, particularly when Kenya was going through some challenges in regard to the post-election crisis, it reached a point where the government actually switched off the mainstream media or the traditional media, and blogospheres then became the main channels of news dissemination. And because of that, many people were relying on blogs. But in 2019 and maybe 2020, it's emerging that WhatsApp is becoming increasingly a platform that is used to verify news, that young people can access news, for example, through Facebook or Twitter, but in a way, as a way of verifying that, they go through or they send messages to their friends that, have you seen this? Or they can take screenshots and share among themselves as a way of verifying the information. So, I mean, as I said, it is it is a work in progress as well. It's not very easy to measure trust because I think I will need your input on this, because you also talked about measuring technical and emotional, which I think, how do we separate, for example, when we see people liking information, sharing, does it mean really they trust or they're just sharing? And, it brings up the aspects of engagement. So I think that is what I would say for that.
Thank you, Tallam. Dimitra or Ritvvij, do you have any questions or comments for Edwin Tallam?
I have a short comment. So I think it's a very interesting finding that people trust WhatsApp to that great extent. And I think it shows, this also demonstrates that people trust each other more than they trust media and different social institutions. And I think this is something that will help us understand why trust is ailing in our societies and why people just ended to rely on each other or even just on themselves because they don't trust the official voices, they don't trust the authorities anymore. So I think it's an important finding to help us understand that people need to build rapport between each other and seek out to reach out in their community so that they're able to understand, what's happening, try to find information that is relatable and becomes relevant to what they're experiencing. So I'm interested to hear more about your research, Edwin.
Thank you. And Ritvvij, do you have any comments or questions for
Yes.
Edwin?
Even in our research, we found something similar where the trust of the sender in the recipient gets transferred to the message. So every time a message comes and the recipient of the message trusts the sender, the message is seen as more trustworthy. So we've seen similar we've had similar findings in our research.
Thank
That's
you very much for the
fascinating.
comments.
And I suggest we make this as easily flowing as possible, but then now transit a bit to your research, Ritvvij, and the very fascinating cognitive factors that you have identified and that you're building a research project around, which you are, if I understand you correctly, sort of in the process of starting, or you are sort of in the process of doing this research project and building this approach. I had one question or one thing I wondered about when seeing your presentation, and the cognitive factors that you identify and the 16 questions, which all have 4 possible answers. These factors seem to both address how well a message communicates and how easy it is perceived and understood, and whether it's newsworthy or not. And I wanted to ask you how that relates to whether the message contains misinformation or not, if you understand my question.
Yes. So what we've seen is that cognition happens in stages, and each stage acts like a gate. And if the message is very persuasive, that is, it flows fluently through these gates, then the message is considered persuasive and it does not trigger doubt in the mind of the recipient. This is what happens when people binge read messages on WhatsApp or see a lot of videos on YouTube, where if the design of the message is convincing, it is designed well, if there are markers of trust on top of it, then it doesn't trigger the right critical thinking in the user's mind. This makes the message very persuasive.
And Dimitra and Edwin, do you have anything to add or any questions or comments?
Yeah, thank you, Steen. I think I think it's closely related to my findings as well. But I was just interested in when you are looking at aspects of cognition, because it means you also need to, there are aspects of privacy a bit, because I don't know how you navigate that terrain, because private WhatsApp is a private message, unless you explain a bit on how you maneuver that.
So as I mentioned, in 2019, we launched a verification tip line on WhatsApp. It was a project commissioned and supported by WhatsApp, and citizens would crowdsource. They would forward messages that they have received that they think are rumors or misinformation, and we would then fact check, verify it. So all of this data has been crowdsourced. And additionally, the software was even removing out all phone numbers, so we don't know who sent it to us.
Thank you. And also, I mean, cognitive factors are to some extent also relevant for your research, Dimitra, even though you have a very different kind of research approach than Ritvvij does. And I find it very fascinating, but also a bit sad, perhaps, that you found that in your focus groups with more than 150 participants, you find that personal stories and visuals are much more powerful and trustworthy for them than statistics and science and big data and information from authorities when it comes to what information to trust and build upon when making decisions on vaccines, etc. And that made me wonder what parts of stories matter to people and what role does facts and correct information, etc., play to how powerful a personal story is. I mean, could a story contain lots of misinformation and still be a powerful story that would impact your focus group participants? Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Of course. So I think the fact that personal stories become so relevant is because people can relate to the people who are the heroes of these stories. And by that, I mean that people are driven by emotions to a great extent. And that's why I think Ritvvij's approach through the study of cognitive factors is very important to the study of misinformation. So it seems that when scientific information is presented with hardcore facts, they can be impressive, but it's difficult for people to make them feel relevant to what they are experiencing. So I wouldn't agree with you that it's a sad finding that personal stories matter most. I think it gives us a lot of useful insight to understand how we can approach people in different ways, in more empathic ways, to make the hardcore facts become more relevant instead of feeling that they're coming from authoritative voices, especially when those voices are not trusted anymore. And we have seen that for many years now, in different surveys, people just report that they don't trust the major institutions. So I think that even if we focus on giving out, publishing, and highlighting all the scientific information that that's out there, if people don't trust the ones who are producing that information won't have any impact on their lives because they will be seeking information that they can relate to. And I think by studies conducted by, for example, this small panel today, we can tune into people's different expectations and concerns and questions because people need answers, and especially being in a crisis in the pandemic for the last 4.5 months now and worldwide. People are alarmed. They have mixed emotions and feelings, and they are trying to make sense of what is happening in order to feel that they have some control over their lives and decisions and their actions. So when people are struggling to make sense of a problem that is just too big and too complicated for anyone to fully comprehend, they're looking for answers. So this means that they're looking for information. And if authorities cannot satisfy their desire to know more, this void will be filled by others. And often this void is filled with rumors and misinformation and different misconceptions. So I think it's important to take a step back and try to see how we can use this crisis as an opportunity to tune in into what people care about. And I think we're trying to combat misinformation by producing more facts and by producing more evidence. And I'm not sure that this can be the answer to that, because people feel that they have been left out of the picture, out of the equation for such a long time. So trust has been eroded for so many years, and now we're in the middle of the crisis, and we're trying to understand what we can do in order to make people to trust the institutions who are delivering scientific and fact-checked information. But if people don't trust these voices, they won't trust the information that they produced anyway.
Thank you, Dimitra. We have some questions from the audience, but I would just like to give Edwin and Ritvvij a chance to comment on Dimitra's research, if you have any short comments.
Maybe I can go first. So, Dimitra, that is a very interesting study, and I think I quite like the idea or the bottom-up approach, where you start with the individual, that everyone has a story, and I quite like the idea that the stories of these vaccines is such that people are brought in only during the testing, but they are not given more information even during the process that this vaccine is being developed. Mm-hmm. So I quite like the bottom-up approach rather than the parachuting of vaccine that is ready to just be tested on human beings. So I think I quite like that.
Thanks, Edwin.
And Ritvvij, do you have any comments or questions?
So even we noticed the same thing, that a message that has a coherent story tends to be very persuasive, and it makes this, and if the story is very relatable to the recipient of the message, then they tend to read it and consume it faster.
Interesting, thank you. We have a couple of questions from the audience. I will do some of them. First, there's a question from Laurie Robertson, and I guess this is for all of you and not any one of you particularly. And she wonders, is anyone aware of research on who's reading fact checks of viral claims? I don't know if any of you want to or are aware of such research.
Pardon, I didn't get the question well.
If any of you are aware of research on who are the ones reading fact checks of viral claims? So basically, who are the ones sort of reading fact checks? Do we know anything about that?
I think that's a great question for you, Sten, and the SCAM project. So I'm not focusing on that, but it would be great to see some research on who actually is interested in reading different fact checks of viral claims, because we know who's reading the viral claims, or at least we can make some assumptions on that. But I'm not sure if other people except scientists and people who do scholarly work are reading the fact checks of these viral claims. So it would be an interesting research question to answer.
Yeah, and you are absolutely right, Dimitra. This is something we will look into in the SCAM project, actually. We will do one more question from Aziz. Can misinformation in areas of conflict be used as factor to tackle credibility of the sources? Can misinformation in areas of conflict be used as a factor to tackle credibility of the sources? That's a yes/no question. I don't know if any of you have any opinion on that question.
I think it depends on what we mean by conflict. I mean, are we talking about conflict-ridden societies like Syria, for example? I'm not sure if I get the question right. Just as a general comment on that, I would say that if we are in the middle of a conflict or in the middle of a crisis, it's more challenging to study what the credibility of the sources is, because people don't have consistent behaviors, they don't have consistent approaches to information. If we are in a flight or fight mode, we need to find answers fast, and our questions are constantly changing. So I'm not sure if if we're experiencing a conflict, if we're in the middle of the conflict, if this is the best timing to see how we can. Definitely, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to see how we can build trust in these sources, so that we also enhance the credibility in them.
And guys,
what I would say.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Edwin. We are out of time, unfortunately. We need to move on to the next 3 panelists. And this, I realize time flies, and this was way too short time to discuss your fascinating and interesting research. And there are so many questions that you probably have to each other, and which I have also. But for now, I have to thank you very much for being part of this, and hopefully we can continue this discussion later on, and hopefully also in Oslo next year for the next Global Fact. So thank you, guys, and I will now.
Thank you.
Thank you too.
So I will now introduce the next 3 researchers. Silje Susanne Alvestad, who is a postdoc researcher at the University of Oslo, and Silje is doing linguistic research on the characteristics of fake news. Silje, are you there? There you are, Silje. Welcome. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and your research.
Thank you very much. Like you said, my name is Silje Susanne Alvestad. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Oslo, specializing in linguistics. My languages are Russian and Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian. Recently, I was awarded a researcher project grant from the Research Council of Norway for my research project that is titled Fakespeak, the Language of Fake News Detection Based on Linguistic Cues. And this is an interdisciplinary project involving linguists and computer scientists based in Norway and the UK. So it's linguistics driven. I would say 70% linguistics and 30% computer science. Corpus linguists have shown that the grammatical structure of a text varies according to the author's purpose of the text. Now, we define fake news as news items that in which case the author knows that they're false and intends to deceive. So in our definition of fake news, there is an intention from the author's side to deceive. So I think this definition will correspond with disinformation. Furthermore, there is this very interesting study that has been conducted for English language, specifically a corpus linguistics study that has been conducted by Jack Reeve and Helena Woodfield at the University of Birmingham. They investigated 2 data sets of respectively fabricated and genuine news articles written by one and the same author. And very briefly, they subjected the data sets to corpus linguistics methods, for example, register analysis. And very briefly, they discovered intriguing differences between these 2 data sets in terms of verbal tenses used, the kind of personal pronouns that were used, and also average word length varied, and also the use of emphatics. So what we want to do in this project is to see how the situation is in Norwegian and Russian, and we're also going to do some studies, some more studies on English, and we'll see whether our findings can help us improve existing fake news detection tools. And in this project, we also have some industrial collaboration partners, specifically the Norwegian News Agency and the National Broadcasting Company, as well as Norway's first and so far only fact-checking service.
Thank you, Silje. And the next presenter we have is Jozef Michael Mintal from the Central European University. And he's doing research on mapping mis- and disinformation sites in Slovakia. Welcome, Jozef. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and the research that you're doing.
So, hello, hi everyone, and first of all, thank you for having me on this panel. As you said, I'm a fellow at the Central European University and a doctoral candidate at Maciej Bell University. So the research I was presenting is part of two projects. One is the Business of Misinformation, which is run at the CEU, and it's run in 6 European countries. I'm responsible for Slovakia, and a minor part of the project is run at the UMB Data and Society Lab. And in the project, we were looking at Slovakian disinformation and misinformation websites. So we identified 49 of them, and we were interested in who's behind them, how do the entities behind those disinformation and misinformation websites operate, so what's their operational structure, financial structure, etc. And in terms of methodology, we were using both qualitative and quantitative, so computational approaches. We developed a Python script that was looking through the source codes of those websites and linking them together. And qualitative, so we worked with open source databases, but also articles, investigative. We also work with investigative journalists on this. And in terms of our findings, a lot of those websites claim to be open and transparent in terms of their financial and ownership structure, but that's really far away from the truth. So a lot of them are trying to actively conceal their identity. And we really had to dig into who's behind them. But we were able to successfully identify 35 entities behind those websites and kind of untangle the operational structure behind them. It looks like most of the websites are independently operated, with only a couple websites being linked to the same entity. And we were also looking at how their financial structure is being run, and we identified 4 sources of income that we canvassed, and that's tax designation. A lot of those websites are selling goods and services, so many have really elaborated e-shops, and for example, selling frying pans for chickens. And the other 2 sources of income are crowdfunding and ads. And the whole project is kind of like geared towards maybe policy implications and kind of providing authorities and investigative journalists with more information about who's behind those websites.
Thank you, Jozef. And finally, we will bring in EunRyung Chong, who is the director of the Seoul National University Fact Check Center. And Eun is doing research on cross-checks done by the various actors involved with the SNU Fact Check Center. Welcome, Eun. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and the research that you're doing.
Thank you, Steen. Hi, Global Fact. I'm EunRyung Chong, the director of SN Fact Check Center. SN Fact Check is the only fact-checking platform in Korea which is collaboratively run by 30 affiliated media outlets and Seoul National University's Institute of Communication Research. My research has explored the results and meanings of SN Fact Check's 3 years collaborative fact-checking through descriptive content analysis and interviews with the fact-checking journalists. On the SNU Fact Check platform, media outlets can access any issue on the platform, which can also be verified by any other outlet at any time. This system increases the opportunity to maintain consistency in the selection of claims by having different news outlets fact-check the same issues. Second, the controversy of political bias in fact-checking could be eased to a certain extent. As any fact-check is joined by both liberal and conservative media, the conclusions by opposing media outlets do not always coincide. Despite its significance, cross-checking on SN fact-check has been sluggish. 14% of total cases were cross-checked so far. The percentage of verifications with the same decision is about 60%. The relative dearth of cross-checked cases is due to the competition among media outlets. While cross-checking has not reached its full potential, it seems to have a positive effect of enhancing the quality of journalism. The interviewed journalists felt that they were more attentive in investigation and reporting processes because their verification could be re-verified by other journalists. I think I've spent all the time. Thanks.
Thank you, Eun. And I know that it's approaching midnight in South Korea, so I suggest that we start with discussing your project so that you don't risk fall asleep while we discuss the other project. I don't think there's a risk for that, but I know it's late for you, and I really appreciate you staying up so late. So I was really fascinated by your study and the SNU fact-check platform, where more than 30 media outlets post fact-check, and where they also, as you said, they cross-check the same claims. So you have several fact-checkers checking the same claims, etc. And I found it particularly interesting that in only 60% of the cases of cross-checked, cross-fact-checked cases, they arrived at the same conclusion, which means that in 40%, almost half of the cases, the different fact-checkers arrive at different conclusions, which is, of course, I guess, speaks to the difficulties of arriving on reliable conclusions when doing fact-checks. So I wonder if you could elaborate a bit on why you think that is. Is it because the various fact checkers have different methods and standards of verification, or are there ideological differences between the fact checkers, or why do you think they have so problems at arriving at the same conclusions?
I think the main reason media outlets come to different conclusions is that they often interpret the same evidence differently. As you know, fact-checking is not quantitative. Even if it's based on evidence, subjectivity cannot be ruled out. So there is a difference in interpretation. However, differences in interpretation do not necessarily arise because of ideology. In some cases, conservative and liberal media have the same interpretation of the same evidence, so the judgment is consistent. That gives audience the reliability to fact-check.
Interesting. And Silje or Jozef, do you have any questions or comments for Eun?
Yeah. First of all, it's really interesting research, and I kind of wanted to ask the same question, but you already asked one. But another question, how do you think, or do you believe, how to incentivize those actors to, because you were talking about that not a lot of those media companies are using the cross fact checking. So how to get on board with the rest? Is there?
Yeah, the main is, well, there's no there's no incentive, and I think the reason they apply for this, they are affiliated with the SNU fact check, is a kind of a public duty, the public service. So, but the meaning for the is, I think, well, they help Korean civil society. The Korean civil society is highly politicized and partisan. People are hostile to the media with different political tendencies from theirs. In such a polarized society, collaborative fact-checking by opposing media outlets may provide a public forum based on facts rather than opinion.
Thank you. And Silje, I guess we can sort of ease into your research as well. And if you have any comments for Ewan, please feel free to bring them on. But I think I would just like to say I think it's great to have a linguistic perspective on these questions as well. And I really look forward to the results of your research project. And you say in your presentations that you have started a pilot study, even though you haven't been able to do as much as you had hoped due to the current situation. But I believe you say in your presentation that you can share some information on what you have found in your pilot study, and you say something about it has been a bit more difficult than you assumed beforehand. So I wonder if you can elaborate a bit on that, while also, if you have any comments for Ewan, please bring them on as well. Silje, you're muted. We can't hear you, I think.
Sorry, there. So thank you very much. Ewan, thank you very much for your presentation. I second what Michal said. I also found it very interesting. As far as I could understand, you had interviewed journalists, right? And how they experienced this variation that you, or the fact that they could only agree as far as 60% of these news items were concerned. So if I've understood correctly, then I wonder if you have considered extending the study to interview readers about their experience when these results from these fact checks are so different.
That's a great question. Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I think I need to do that. But based on the interview with journalists, especially the effect of disagreement, I wonder whether the effect of or disagreement be positive or negative. And on the negative side, the concern is that the inconsistent results could cause confusion among fact-checking users. But the positive side is that the different results on the same issue could form a political forum. As I said, cross-checking allows citizens to not only look at the results, but also to read the process of why the fact-checkers came to such a decision. And I think it's a fact-based communication and persuasion. And as you suggested, I think I have to interview audience, not only journalists.
And please continue, Silje, with commenting on your pilot study if you have anything you would like to share from that.
Yes, I can share a couple of things. First of all, it turned out to be a bit more complicated than I had expected. So at first, first I could say that it was a very, very interesting data set. So last year, there was broadcast an episode of a series that was called The Enlightenment of the People. They had conducted a very controversial experiment. They wanted to see, the production team wanted to see, by trying to expose the pupils at the Norwegian secondary school for fake news, disinformation, misinformation over, I think, a 2-week period, whether they could inflict on the election results on that school. And I got, this was very controversial. I got access to this material, those fabricated news articles. And first, so then I had like 20 pages. It's not very much, but at least a little data set. And then it turned out that I could use only 5 of those pages because, like I said in the introduction, we want to look at data sets that are written by one and the same author, so as to control for several potential sources of error. But it turned out that a lot of these texts were written by not only a journalist, but also they were co-authored, some of them, and some of them were also written by other non-journalists. So like I said, I could just use 5 pages. And then the second challenge was that I need to establish a control set myself. So this individual is a journalist, and the person has then written genuine news articles for not only one newspaper, but several. So how to pick the articles from which news outlet to constitute the control set. That was the second challenge. I solved, I think, that part of the problem. But yeah, challenges like that and farther, I unfortunately haven't come. But I also will be very excited to see what I can find, and I also, of course, need to expand this the Norwegian data sets, obviously.
Thank you, Silje. I see that we have some questions from the audience, some great questions, and some of them are directly related to your project, Silje. So I suggest we spend a few minutes on Jozef project first, and then we will return to your project with the questions from the audience as well. So Jozef, Michal, in your research, you're mapping companies and individuals that run mis and disinformation websites in Slovakia, and you managed to map 35 out of 49 you have identified. And I was a bit curious about the ownership structure of those sites. 14 of them were owned by NGOs, if I understand correctly. But all of them had some kind of economic income. They had some, or they seemed to be commercial in some sense or the other. And I wonder if you could elaborate a bit on the differences between them. Are all of these sites commercial sites, or are some of them more ideological in their setup?
Yeah, so some of them are actually more ideological in their setup, but most of them are really, it appears to be that they're the main kind of thing is income, is to produce, is to get income and to commercialize the business of the disinformation and misinformation, well, the disinformation they produce. So we only found a tiny, only a couple of websites that appeared to be actually really ideological and not to display any sorts of ads and not to sell anything. And those websites were mostly health related and related to vaccination. But the other websites, for most of the news, kind of bogus news websites, they really try to cash in on the stuff they produce.
Great, and we have a question from the audience directly to you, Jozef, which I believe will be interesting to take now. I know you talk a bit about this in your presentation, but it would be nice to elaborate on it. And the question is, how did you choose the website you evaluated?
So we first started with, there's a list in Slovakia, it's called Konspiratory. It's a database of disinformation and misinformation websites from Czechia and from Slovakia. So we identified Slovak websites on that list, and we used that kind of as a input into our script, which mapped more websites that were connected to those websites that were part of the conspiratory database. But for our research, we only used the websites that were part of the conspiratory database and not the affiliated ones. So that's kind of what we want to do in the future, because there were more of those.
And just a follow-up question there, do you know anything about the criteria for being listed in that database?
Yeah, so sure. It's a NGO which has a independent board set up, and members of the board are journalists from big national media outlets, history. There's a history professor, a doctor in, I think, tropical med. I'm not sure, but a doctor in medicine. So they have all kinds of experts. In the past, it's actually true that a lot of those disinformation websites were attacking the independence of the board, and they're suing them because they don't want to be on that list, because a lot of advertisers are looking at that list, and once they see that a website is part and is on that list, they're pulling out their ads.
Right, so it's a controversial list.
In a sense, but it's but only in the eyes of the disinformation people.
So Silje or Ian, do you have any questions or comments for Jozef?
Yeah, Jozef, I want to replicate your research in Korea. I think we need to do that to understand the ecosystem of fake news. It's just a fascinating study. Your research is an analysis of the websites, but in Korea, YouTube is mentioned as the most popular place for fake news these days. Were you not interested in social media or websites more important to spread fake news than social media in Slovakia?
Yeah, so we were only focused on classical websites, not social media, but we were mapping the connection between social media and those websites. So how the informations are shared and what's the traffic between social media and those disinformation websites. And we were analyzing different categories. So, for example, we found that health-related websites on the ones that we were researching got most of their traffic from social media, but the more established bogus news websites got a lot of the traffic directly. So someone directly put in the website, and yeah, for sure we would love to do social media, but there are some limitations that we're trying to work around with data access, and well, API Facebook is not really helpful in a lot of senses.
Silje, do you have any questions or comments for Jozef?
Yes, I have. First of all, I also found your presentation very interesting. So, as far as the entities and the finances behind these websites are concerned, to what extent are they national? I mean, Slovakian, and do you trace any international or foreign elements there?
Yes. So all of the entities behind those websites were Slovakian and run by Slovak people, but we can be certain, because there's some indications that, for example, some NGOs that were running some websites are getting finances from abroad, but you can't really verify that, and it's more a investigative kind of thing. So in our research, we didn't find any connections between the domestic and abroad entities, but we can expect that there are some, but we can't be certain about that.
So thank you, Jozef. time's flying. I would just like to return for a short second to your project, Silje, and ask the one question that I promised from the audience to your project, which is a good question, but it's difficult to answer, I'm afraid. It's from Booma Cruz. Is there anything in the use of language that makes fake news easily believable?
Thank you, Booma. That's a very, very good question. I suspect that there is, and hopefully my project, when it starts in October. I forgot to say that, it hasn't started yet, but hopefully I will have some inkling on that by 2024.
Great, looking forward to that, and looking forward to also hearing more about your projects, Jozef and Edwin, and I would like to thank you for participating and wish you good luck with your projects, and hopefully we will hear more about them in the future, and I hope that you will be able to come to Oslo and that it will be possible to travel to Oslo or any other parts of the world next year. This has been a great session. Thank you all, and also thank you to the audience for asking and posing interesting and challenging questions. And I hope you all will join in for the next session and the final session of the academic track, which starts in an hour. Thank you, and goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.